March 1863, Alexandria, Virginia, the American Civil War. Dr. Samuel Callicott seized the 9-year-old girl by the collar, yanked her forward, and pressed his measuring caliper hard against her skull, hard enough to leave marks. "You are nothing," he snarled into her face. "A trick, a fraud. Science has already buried your kind in the bottom of the intelligence scale, and I will prove it today." The child did not flinch. She looked straight into his eyes and said quietly, "Your last study had 31 subjects. That is not science. That is a lie." If you believe every human soul deserves to be seen, subscribe to this channel right now, drop your city in the comments below, and let me know how far this story has traveled, because what happened next will shake everything you thought you knew. The contraband camp outside Alexandria smelled like mud and smoke and something else, something harder to name. It was the smell of people who had been running for so long they'd almost forgotten what standing still felt like. Thousands of them had poured into this place after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in January of that year. Freed in name, stranded in fact. The Union Army had thrown up these rough shelters along the Potomac, tents, half-built wooden shacks, open fires burning through the night. Children ran barefoot between the rows of sick and dying. Old men sat with their backs against fence posts, staring at nothing. Women boiled scraps of cloth in iron pots, trying to keep infection from spreading. Nobody was supposed to become famous here. Nobody was supposed to stand out. That was the rule of survival. You stayed invisible. You stayed quiet. You stayed small. Eliza Davis broke every single one of those rules, not because she wanted to, but because she simply could not help it. She was 9 years old, small for her age. She had large, still eyes that never seemed to blink quite as often as other children's eyes did. She sat near the edge of the medical tent most mornings, watching the army surgeons work. Not playing, not sleeping, just watching and listening. Private Thomas Garrett noticed her first. He was 22, from Ohio, newly assigned to the camp as a supply officer. He had been moving crates of hardtack past the medical tent when he heard a child's voice. Calm, precise, completely out of place. "The wound on that man's left leg is infected below the surface. You cannot see it yet, but you will smell it by tomorrow evening. If you wait that long, you will lose the leg and possibly the man." Garrett stopped walking. The army surgeon, a stout man named Dr. Henry Price, looked up from his work with the particular expression of a man who has just been told something absurd by someone he has no patience for. He was elbow deep in a dressing change. He was tired. He had been tired for 3 months straight. "Child," he said, not looking at her directly, "go find somewhere else to sit." "I am sitting here," Eliza said. "You are bothering me." "I am telling you something true." Price straightened up and turned to face her fully now. He was a big man. He used his size unconsciously, the way men do when they have never been told no by anyone smaller than themselves. "Where did you hear that? Who told you about infection?" "Nobody told me," Eliza said. "I read the surgical manual you keep on the left side of your table, the one with the broken spine. Page 112 describes the early symptoms of deep tissue infection. The man on the cot has 3 of the 4 listed signs. The 4th sign, the smell, comes last." Price stared at her. "You cannot read," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of the world as he understood it. "I read very well," Eliza said. "I read your manual. I read the letters the soldiers leave on their cots when they go to surgery. I read the labels on every medicine bottle you have on that shelf. I can tell you what each one contains and what it is used for, if you would like." There was a long silence. Then Garrett, still holding his crate of hardtack, said very quietly, "Dr. Price, Maybe you should listen to her." Price did not listen. Not that day. But the following evening, when the soldier's wound began to turn and the smell arrived exactly as the child had said it would, Price stood outside the medical tent in the cooling dark for a very long time, saying nothing to anyone. The next morning, he went and found Eliza. She was sitting in the same spot, as if she had never moved. "You were right," he said. "I know," she said. "How did you learn to read?" For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not pain, exactly. Not pride. Something older than both of those things. "I watched people do it," she said. "I watched them long enough. Then I understood." "That is not how reading works," Price said. "That is how it worked for me," Eliza said. Price reported the incident to his commanding officer that afternoon. The commanding officer wrote it up and sent it 2 levels higher. By the end of the week, the report had found its way to a desk in Washington, and from that desk, it landed in front of a man who made his living deciding what was real and what was not. Dr. Samuel Calicott was 47 years old and considered one of the most respected scientific minds in the country. He specialized in craniology, the study of skull measurements and brain capacity, which he and his colleagues used to construct elaborate, detailed, official-sounding arguments for why certain races of people were intellectually inferior. He had published 3 books on the subject. He had lectured at Harvard. He had been quoted in congressional debates. He had built his entire career on a single foundational belief that the African mind was, by nature and by biology, incapable of higher reasoning. When the report about the Davis girl reached him, he read it twice. Then he set it down. Then he picked it up and read it a 3rd time. Then he laughed. "A parlor trick," he told his assistant. "Someone has trained this child to perform, like a trained animal. They are using her to make political theater out of a war." He folded the report into 3rds and slid it into his coat pocket. "I will go down there, expose the fraud in 2 days, write it up, and be home before the week is out." He told himself that the entire train ride south. He was still telling himself that when he walked through the gates of the camp on a gray Tuesday morning in late March, with his measuring instruments in a leather case at his side and his certainty packed just as tightly as his equipment. A young corporal named James Weir was assigned to escort him. Weir was from Kentucky. He had grown up around people like Calicott. He knew the shape of that certainty. He had seen it all his life. But 3 weeks in this camp had done something to him that he could not fully articulate. He had seen things here that did not fit neatly into the world he had been handed. He found Eliza sitting near the water pump at the center of the camp. "This is her?" Calicott said. "Yes, sir," Weir said. Calicott looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he is about to solve. "Child," he said, crouching slightly to address her at eye level, not out of respect, but out of the instinct to establish control. "My name is Dr. Calicott. I have come to ask you some questions." "I know who you are," Eliza said. Calicott blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Dr. Samuel Calicott. You wrote The Natural Order of Intellectual Capacity, published in 1859 by the Boston Academy Press. In Chapter 4, you argue that the average cranial volume of an African male is 14% smaller than that of a European male, and that this difference accounts for a measurable gap in reasoning ability. She paused. Your sample size in that study was 31 individuals. That is not large enough to support the conclusions you drew. The margin of error alone would invalidate the central claim. The silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before in that camp. Weir later said it was the kind of silence that happens right before something falls. Calicott stood up slowly. His face had gone a color that Weir could not quite name. Not red, not white, something in between, something unsteady. "Where did you read that book?" Calicott said. "I did not read it," Eliza said. Corporal Weir read it aloud to another soldier 2 nights ago. I was sitting against the far fence, approximately 40 feet away. I heard every word. Calicott turned to look at Ware. Ware swallowed. That is true, sir. I did read it. I didn't think she could hear from that distance. She heard every word from 40 feet away, Calicott said, as if repeating it might make more sense. In a camp full of noise. At night. Apparently, Ware said. Calicott set his leather case down on the ground. He opened it. He took out his measuring tool slowly, the way a man does when he is doing something with his hands because his mind needs a moment to catch up with itself. Let us begin the examination, he said. Of course, Eliza said. Would you like me to tell you what you are going to find before you find it, or would you prefer to discover it yourself? Calicott looked at her across the mud and the morning light and the noise of the camp all around them, and for the first time in his 47 years on this earth, Dr. Samuel Calicott, the man who had built a career on knowing exactly what every mind was capable of, did not know what to say. Let me begin, he said quietly. Whenever you are ready, Eliza said. And she waited, perfectly still, the way she always waited, like someone who already knew the ending of the story and was simply giving everyone else time to catch up. Calicott spent the first hour doing what he always did. He measured, he recorded, he wrote numbers into his leather notebook with the careful, deliberate strokes of a man who trusted numbers above all other things. Skull circumference, forehead width, the distance between the eyes. He had done this hundreds of times before. The numbers always told the same story. He expected them to tell it again. They did not. Every measurement he took landed inside the range he associated with his most gifted European subjects. Not close to it, inside it, comfortably, undeniably inside it. He checked his instruments. He recalibrated. He measured again. The numbers stayed exactly where they were, unmoved by his disbelief. Corporal Weir stood a few feet back, watching. He said nothing, but his jaw was tight in a way that told its own story. Calicott set his instruments down and folded his hands in his lap and looked at Eliza directly for the first time since the examination began. I'm going to ask you some questions now, he said. I want you to answer only what you know. Do not guess, do not invent. Only what you genuinely know. I understand, Eliza said. Who taught you Latin? No one. You cannot learn Latin without instruction. I heard a Catholic priest read Mass aloud every Sunday morning for 2 years on the plantation where I was kept. He used the same texts repeatedly. I memorized them. Then I worked backward to understand the structure of the language. It took approximately 4 months. Calicott was quiet for a moment. You worked backward? Yes. From memorized text into grammatical structure. Alone? Yes. He wrote something in his notebook. His hand was not entirely steady. What else do you know in Latin? And she told him. She recited passages from Cicero. She quoted Caesar. She moved through the declensions with the ease of someone strolling through a familiar room. Then, without being asked, she shifted into German. 3 stanzas of Goethe, clean and correct. And then into French, translating a passage she had once heard a Union officer read aloud from a letter his wife had sent him. She even told Calicott what the officer's wife had written in the second paragraph, which the officer had not read aloud, but had only read silently to himself before folding the letter away. Calicott stopped writing. That is not possible, he said. You said he read that part silently. He did, Eliza said, but his lips moved. Very slightly. Most people's do when they are reading something that matters to them. The pen slipped from Calicott's fingers. He let it stay on the ground. Weir picked it up and held it out to him. Callicott did not take it immediately. He was staring at the child with an expression that Ware had never seen on the face of a man like Callicott before. It was the expression of a man watching the floor disappear beneath him. "Move to mathematics," Callicott said finally. His voice had changed. It was quieter now, more careful, like a man walking on ice he is no longer certain will hold. "I want to test your reasoning, not just your memory."
"Of course,"
Eliza said. What followed over the next 90 minutes was, by any measure, the most extraordinary examination Callicott had ever conducted. He gave her problems from Euclid. She solved them. He gave her problems from more advanced texts, things he had studied at university, things he still found challenging. She worked through them aloud, step by step, explaining each move before she made it, catching herself once on a small error and correcting it before he had even noticed it was there. At one point, she paused in the middle of a long algebraic proof and said, "There is an error in the original problem as you wrote it. In the third line, the coefficient should be 7, not 9. If you use 9, the entire proof collapses at the end." She said it the way you would tell someone they had a button undone. Matter of fact, helpful, not triumphant. Callicott looked at his notebook. He had copied the problem from memory in a hurry that morning. He had written 9. The correct value was 7. He had made the mistake, not her. He sat back slowly. Weir exhaled through his nose. It was not quite a laugh. It was the sound a man makes when he witnesses something he knows he will be thinking about for the rest of his life. "Child," Callicott said, and his voice was very different now from the voice he had used when he first walked through the camp gates that morning. "I need to ask you something that is not about mathematics." "All right," Eliza said. "How long have you been able to do this?" She thought about it, really thought about it, in a way that made the question seem heavier than it sounded. "I do not know when it started," she said. "I do not remember a time when it was different. I remember everything I have ever heard, everything I have ever seen, every word, every face, every sound." She stopped. "Every sound," she said again, softer this time. Callicott leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean by that?" For a long moment, Eliza said nothing. Then she said, "I mean that I remember the sound my brother made when they took him." The air between them went very still. "How old was your brother?" Callicott asked. 6, she said. "He was 6 years old. I was 7. They sold him at the market in Richmond on a Thursday. I know it was Thursday because the church bell rang 8 times before it happened, and the church always rang 8 times on Thursday mornings." She paused. "I can still hear it. Every morning when I wake up, the bell, and then his voice." Callicott said nothing. He could not find anything to say. "That is the part no one asks about," Eliza said. "They ask about the Latin and the mathematics. They do not ask about the other things I cannot forget." She looked at him steadily. "I remember every man who ever raised his hand on that plantation. I remember their names and their faces and what they ate for breakfast on the mornings they chose to hurt someone. I remember the sound of the overseer's boots on the wooden floor coming toward the women's quarters at night." She did not look away. "I remember all of it, every day, all of it, every day, without stopping." Callicott sat with that for a long time. It was Weir who finally spoke. His voice was rough. "Does it ever get quieter?" "No," Eliza said simply. "It does not." That evening, Callicott sat alone in the tent that had been assigned to him and did not open his notebook for 3 hours. He stared at the canvas wall. He thought about the 3 books he had written. He thought about the lectures he had given. He thought about the men in Washington who had cited his work in congressional debates, using his numbers and his language to build arguments for why certain people did not deserve the same rights as other people. He thought about a 9-year-old girl who had just corrected his arithmetic, recited Cicero from memory, and then told him without self-pity or performance that she woke up every morning to the sound of her 6-year-old brother being sold. Around midnight, Ware ducked his head into the tent. "Doctor, you need to come to the medical ward. I am not on duty tonight." "No, sir, but she is." Calicott followed Ware across the dark camp to the medical tent. Inside, a young soldier named Private Aaron Cole lay on a cot with a high fever and a wound that had stopped responding to treatment. Dr. Price was standing over him with the particular look of a man who has run out of options and is watching the clock. Eliza was crouched beside the cot. "She came in on her own," Price said when he saw Calicott. "I tried to send her away. She would not go." "What is she doing?" Calicott asked. "Arguing with me," Price said, and there was something complicated in his voice. "About treatment." Eliza looked up at Calicott. "He needs carbolic acid on the wound," she said. "The infection is in the tissue. The current dressing is not sufficient. Carbolic acid will stop it." Price shook his head. "That method is not standard. It has not been formally accepted. I am not going to experiment on a soldier." "You are already experimenting on him," Eliza said. "The treatment you are using is failing. He has maybe until morning before the infection moves to his blood. After that, you cannot save him." Price looked at Calicott. His expression was not asking for permission. It was asking for something else. For someone else to share the weight of this moment. Calicott looked at the soldier on the cot. The boy was young, maybe 19. He was shaking even in his sleep. Calicott looked at Eliza. She met his eyes without blinking. "Dr. Price," Calicott said quietly, "do you have carbolic acid in your supplies?" Price was silent for a moment. "Yes." "Use it." Price looked at him for a long time. Then he turned, found his supply case, and began to prepare the treatment. Eliza stayed beside the cot the entire night. She did not sleep. She watched every step of the procedure. At one point, she said quietly, to no one in particular, "The fever will break before dawn." She said it the way someone states a fact they have already confirmed, from a source no one else has access to. Just before 5 in the morning, Private Aaron Cole's fever broke. Price stood at the foot of the cot for a long time. He did not say anything. Neither did Calicott. But when the first gray light came through the tent flap, Calicott looked at the child sitting by that soldier's cot, small, still, awake after a full night, watching, always watching, and he felt something shift in his chest that 47 years of scientific certainty had not prepared him for. He had come here to disprove a story. Instead, he had walked straight into one. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought had begun that he could not stop, a thought that was quiet and terrible and growing. If this child is real, then everything I have told the world is wrong. The morning after Private Cole's fever broke, word had already moved through the camp the way word always moves through places where people have nothing but time and fear and each other. By breakfast, every soldier and every freed person in that camp knew two things. A child had saved a man's life, and a scientist from Washington had watched it happen and said nothing to contradict her. That silence was louder than anything Calicott could have said. He knew it. He felt it every time someone looked at him as he crossed the camp that morning. The soldiers watched him differently now, not with hostility, with something more unsettling than hostility. They watched him the way people watch a man they expected to have answers, who has just publicly run out of them. Ware fell into step beside him without being asked. "You have not written in your notebook this morning," he said. "No," Calicott said. "What are you going to put in your report?" Calicott did not answer immediately. He walked 3 more paces before he said, "I do not know yet." Ware nodded slowly. "That is the first honest thing I have heard you say since you arrived, sir." Calicott stopped walking. He turned and looked at the younger man. For a moment, something sharp moved across his face. Then it passed. "You are very free with your opinions, Corporal." "I have been in this camp for 3 weeks," Weir said. "This place does something to a man's willingness to pretend." He paused. "Sir?" Calicott looked away. Across the camp, he could see Eliza sitting near the water pump, exactly where she always seemed to be. A woman was beside her today, older, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that has been hardened not by cruelty, but by endurance. She had her arm around the child's shoulders. This was Ruth, the woman the camp records listed simply as Eliza's guardian, though no one could say exactly when or how that arrangement had formed. Ruth had been a house slave on a Virginia plantation for 30 years. She had buried 2 children. She had walked 40 miles through winter woods to reach this camp. She did not trust anyone easily, and she trusted men like Calicott least of all. When Calicott approached, Ruth looked up at him with eyes that did not pretend. "You come to poke at her again?" she said. "I came to talk," Calicott said. "You been talking for 2 days. What you want to say that you ain't already said?" Calicott crouched down to Eliza's level. He had done this the first day as a move of control. Now he did it because it felt wrong to stand over her. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer me honestly." "I always answer honestly," Eliza said. "I know," he said. "That is what concerns me." He hesitated. "Does anyone else know the full extent of what you can do? Beyond this camp, beyond Price and Weir?" Eliza looked at him for a long moment. "Why does that matter?" "Because I received a letter this morning," Calicott said, "from Washington. Someone in my department has already heard rumors. They are asking for a full report by end of week, and they are not the only ones asking." Ruth's arm tightened around Eliza's shoulders. "Who else?" Ruth said, and her voice had changed. The edge in it now was not defense. It was something older and more practiced. It was the voice of a woman who has spent 30 years knowing when danger is coming before it shows its face. Calicott looked at her directly. "There are men in the Confederate intelligence network who still have contacts in Washington. I do not know how much they know, but the story of a black child who cannot be explained by science, that kind of story travels, and it travels into ears that do not wish her well." Silence. Then Eliza said very quietly, "They would want to make sure the story stopped." "Yes," Calicott said. He did not soften it. She would have known immediately if you tried. They would. Ruth stood up. She was not a tall woman, but she seemed to expand somehow, the way people do when they shift from endurance into action. "Then we need to move her, now, not end of week, now. I cannot arrange a transfer that quickly without your report," Ruth said. "I know, so write it fast." She looked down at Eliza. "Come on, baby, we going inside." Eliza stood. But before she followed Ruth, she turned back to Calicott and said, "What are you going to write in the report?" He did not answer. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "Write whatever keeps me alive. I do not care about the truth of it. I have been alive long enough to know that the truth is not always what protects you." She walked away before he could respond, and Calicott stayed crouched in the dirt for a moment longer. A 47-year-old man who had spent his career telling the world what truth looked like, being instructed in its actual nature by a 9-year-old child. He went back to his tent and opened his notebook. He sat there for a long time. Then he began to write the most important lie of his professional life. The report he composed over the next 2 days was a masterpiece of careful dishonesty. Every sentence was technically defensible. Every claim could be attributed to a legitimate measurement or observation. But the conclusions were constructed with the precision of a man who understood exactly which facts to include and which to bury. He wrote that Eliza Davis displayed above-average rote memory, consistent with cases he had observed in subjects with limited intellectual development who compensated through repetition. He wrote that her apparent mathematical ability was likely the result of extensive coaching by unidentified individuals in the camp. He wrote that her language skills, while notable, showed no evidence of genuine comprehension, only sophisticated mimicry. He wrote that there was nothing in his findings that could not be explained by existing scientific frameworks. Every word of it was a lie. He knew it. He wrote it anyway. When he handed the report to the courier on Thursday morning, Ware was standing nearby. He had read it the previous evening, at Callicott's own invitation. He had said nothing for a long time when he finished. Then he had looked up and said, "You are throwing away everything you built." "No," Callicott had said. "I built it on sand. I am just acknowledging that now. The men who funded your work, the institutions that published you, they will not be pleased when they eventually find out." "They will not find out," Callicott said, "because no one who matters will tell them." He looked at Ware. "And you will not tell them either." "No," Ware said quietly. "I will not." The report went to Washington on Thursday. By Saturday, the reply came back. Case closed. No further investigation required. The child was to be treated as an ordinary displaced person and processed accordingly. Callicott exhaled for what felt like the first time in a week. But the relief lasted exactly 4 hours. On Saturday afternoon, Weir came to his tent at a near run. He was breathing hard. "Someone has been asking about her," he said. "In town." "A man. He is not union. He is not press. Nobody knows who he is. He has been showing a hand-drawn picture of a child to people at the market." He stopped. "The drawing looks exactly like her." Callicott was on his feet before Ware finished the sentence. "How long ago?" "This morning. 2 hours, maybe 3. "Does Ruth know?" "I am going to her now." They found Ruth already in motion. She had packed the single cloth bag that held everything she and Eliza owned. She had Eliza by the hand. She was moving toward the eastern edge of the camp with the focused speed of a woman who had been mentally rehearsing this moment since the day she arrived. "We heard," she said, before either man could speak. "I have contacts in Pennsylvania," Callicott said, matching her stride. "A Quaker school outside Philadelphia. They take in freed children. They ask no questions. They keep no public records." Ruth did not slow down. "How fast can you arrange it?" "I can have papers written by tonight. Travel documents. A new name." Ruth stopped. She turned and looked at him with those eyes that did not pretend. "A new name," she said. "You want to erase her." "I want to protect her," Callicott said. "There is a difference." "Is there?" Ruth said. "Because from where I am standing, you are asking this child to disappear so that the people who built the world on a lie can keep living comfortably inside it." Callicott did not flinch. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly what I am asking, because the alternative is that the man who drew that picture finds her first." Ruth looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Eliza. The child was standing very still, holding Ruth's hand, watching the exchange between the two adults with those large, quiet eyes. "Eliza," Ruth said softly, "you hear what the man is saying." "Yes," Eliza said. "What do you want to do?" The child thought about it. A real, full thought. Not a performance, not a calculated response. She stood there in the fading Saturday light, and she thought about it the way she thought about everything, completely and without pretense. Then she said, "I want to live. I can be someone else if I have to. I have been someone else my whole life already. I have been property. I have been a curiosity. I have been an experiment." She looked at Callicott directly. "If I become Sarah Mitchell, at least I choose it. At least this time it is mine. Calicott felt something in his chest that he did not have a scientific word for. He wrote the papers that night by lamplight. A new name, a new age, a new history. He gave her everything a free child was supposed to have, written on official paper, stamped with a seal that he had no legal right to use and used anyway. Sarah Mitchell, born free, age 9, Pennsylvania. He slid the papers across the table to Ruth. Ruth took them without a word. She folded them carefully and put them inside the cloth bag. Then Eliza did something that Calicott did not expect. She crossed to him and put her small hand on his. "You gave up your work for this," she said. "Not many people give up what they built." "I built it wrong," he said. "Most people keep building wrong things rather than admit it," she said. He had no answer for that either. She pulled her hand back. "Will you tell the truth one day?" she asked. "About what you found here? About what I am?" Calicott looked at the papers on the table, at the false name he had just given a real child. He thought about every report he had ever written, every lecture, every published page. He thought about the congressional debates where men had quoted his numbers to argue that people like Eliza were less. He thought about all the Elizas there must have been before this one, in every contraband camp and every plantation. Children who could have done what she did if anyone had given them the chance. Children whose minds were never measured by anyone who expected to find something extraordinary there. "One day," he said, "when it is safe." She nodded once. Then she turned and followed Ruth out of the tent and into the dark. Weir lingered in the doorway. "Do you think it will ever be safe?" he asked. Calicott looked at the empty table. "I think," he said slowly, "that safe is something we keep promising people who are already running out of time to wait for it." Weir had no answer for that. He stepped out, and the tent flap closed, and Calicott sat alone in the lamplight, with a notebook full of lies and a conscience that had finally, 30 years too late, decided to wake up. Calicott returned to Washington on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after he had left it. The city felt different to him now, though nothing about it had actually changed. The same marble buildings, the same men in the same suits making the same arguments in the same rooms. The same certainty everywhere, hanging over everything like weather. He was the one who had changed, and he had not yet figured out what to do with that. His department head, a man named Commissioner Aldrich, received him in a large office on the second floor of a federal building on Pennsylvania Avenue. Aldrich was 60 years old, white-haired, precise, and accustomed to getting exactly what he expected from the people who worked under him. He had read Calicott's report twice before the meeting. He set it on the desk between them when Calicott sat down. "Clean work," Aldrich said. "Exactly what we needed." "The rumors coming out of that camp were becoming a distraction. Your report closes the matter." He folded his hands. "Nothing extraordinary, nothing unexplainable, just a clever child with a good memory." He almost smiled. "Science holds." "Science holds," Calicott repeated. Aldrich studied him for a moment. "You look tired, Samuel. It was a long assignment. These camps are difficult places. I understand." Aldrich picked up the report and placed it in a desk drawer. "Take a week, rest. Then I need you in Boston. There is a university symposium in April. They want you to present the updated craniology findings. Very important audience. Senators, academics, men who shape policy." He looked at Calicott directly. Men who need to hear from someone they trust. Calicott looked at the closed desk drawer where his report had just disappeared. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, a child named Sarah Mitchell, who had been born Eliza Davis, was sleeping in a Quaker schoolhouse. Or trying to. He doubted she slept easily. He doubted she had ever slept easily. "Of course," he said. "Boston. He stood, shook Aldrich's hand, and walked out of the office. In the hallway, he stopped, put one hand against the wall, and stood there for a full minute before he trusted his legs to carry him to the stairs. 2 weeks passed, then a month. Calicott went to Boston. He stood at the podium in front of 200 educated men and delivered the presentation he had been delivering in various forms for 15 years. He used all the same words. He cited all the same studies. He watched the men in the front rows nod along with the comfortable satisfaction of people being told things they already believe. He did not change a single word of the presentation, but for the first time in 15 years, he could not look at himself in the mirror when he got back to his hotel room that night. March 1865, 2 years after Alexandria. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning. No return address. The handwriting was small and careful and perfectly formed. He recognized it immediately. He had watched those hands write out algebraic proofs in a contraband camp in Virginia. He would have recognized that handwriting anywhere. The letter contained 4 words and a drawing. The words were, "The bird has flown." The drawing was a small, precise sketch of a window with the latch open and the glass pushed outward. Calicott read it 3 times. Then he put on his coat and went directly to the telegraph office and sent a wire to the Quaker school outside Philadelphia. The reply came back within the hour, terse, alarming. The girl called Sarah Mitchell had been missing since Monday morning. Her window had been forced from the outside. The room had signs of struggle. A carriage had been seen on the road before dawn. Ruth was unharmed. She had been locked in a separate room. She did not know who had taken the child. She said only that she had heard 2 men's voices, that one of them spoke with a Virginia accent, that Eliza had not screamed. That last detail stopped Calicott cold. He read the wire again. Eliza had not screamed. He thought about that for a long time. He thought about what it meant, whether it meant she had been taken too quickly to cry out, or whether it meant something else entirely, whether it meant that she had seen them coming, whether, with that mind of hers, she had perhaps known for some time that they were coming, and had made her own plans. He thought about the drawing of the open window. The latch had been forced from the outside, but the drawing she had sent him showed a latch that was open, not broken, open, as if someone on the inside had chosen to unlock it. He sat with that thought for 3 days before he allowed himself to believe it. On the 4th day, a second letter arrived. No postmark, slipped under his office door sometime between midnight and dawn. He found it on a Friday morning, white against the dark floor. Inside was a single page. The handwriting was the same. The letter was longer this time. He read it standing in his doorway, still in his coat from the previous day, because he had fallen asleep at his desk again. She had written, "I knew they were coming 4 days before they arrived. I recognized the first man from the camp. He had been watching the school for 2 weeks. I told Ruth, but Ruth wanted to go to the authorities, and I knew the authorities would only move us somewhere harder to find and easier to control. So I made a different choice. I left on my own terms. I am safe.
I am somewhere they will not think to look for a child like me. I am not going to tell you where. Not because I do not trust you, because I know that if you do not know, you cannot be made to say. I am leaving one thing with this letter. Use it when the time comes. Use it when it is safe. You promised me." Clipped to the letter was a handwritten document, 12 pages, dense, precise, organized. It was a full account of everything Eliza had heard, read, memorized, and understood during her time at the camp and at the Quaker school. It was written in 3 languages. It included mathematical proofs, medical observations, and a 14-point refutation of every central argument in Calicott's published work. His own work, dismantled from the inside by the child his work had been designed to diminish. At the bottom of the last page, she had written one final line.
I am proof that the theory was always wrong. Keep this until the world is ready to hear it. It will be ready eventually. I have calculated the probability. It is not 0. Callicott sat down on the floor of his office. He was not a man who sat on floors. He sat there anyway. He held those 12 pages in both hands, and he read them from beginning to end without stopping. When he finished, he read them again. By the time he put them down, the light coming through the window had shifted from morning gray to afternoon gold. He never went back to craniology. He submitted a letter of resignation from his position 2 weeks later, citing health reasons. Aldrich did not believe the health reasons, but accepted them because it was easier than asking questions. Callicott's colleagues noted his departure with varying degrees of puzzlement and indifference. A man who had been indispensable to a certain kind of thinking had simply stopped being available for it. The field closed around his absence the way water closes over a stone. He moved to a small house in western Massachusetts. He kept the 12 pages locked in a metal box under the floorboards. He kept the 2 letters folded inside his coat pocket against his chest every day for the rest of his life. He never heard from Eliza again. But sometimes, in the years that followed, things would happen that made him wonder. A school for black children would open in a town, with no clear explanation for its funding. A legal brief making an unusually precise argument for equal education rights would circulate through Washington, and no one could trace its origin. A medical paper would appear in a small abolitionist journal, written under an assumed name, describing infection treatments that were years ahead of their time. Callicott would read these things and hold them in his mind without saying anything to anyone. Weir visited him once, in the summer of 1868. They sat on the porch and did not say much for a long time. Then Weir said, "Do you think she is alive?" "Yes," Callicott said, without hesitation. "How do you know?" "Because she told me she calculated the probability." He looked out at the trees, and she was never wrong about a calculation. Weir nodded slowly. "The report you wrote, the false one, it still bothers you." "Every day," Callicott said. "But you do not regret it." "No," Callicott said. "I regret the 15 years before it. I regret every honest report I wrote that was built on dishonest foundations. I regret standing at podiums telling rooms full of powerful men that the numbers confirmed what they already wanted to believe." He paused. "The false report is the only document with my name on it that I am not ashamed of." Weir stayed for 2 days. When he left, he shook Callicott's hand at the door and said, "You should write it down, what really happened, the real account." "I will," Callicott said, "when it is safe." Weir looked at him for a moment. "She asked you that same question," he said. "You gave her the same answer." "Yes," Callicott said. "You have been giving that answer for 5 years." Callicott was quiet. Then he said, "She told me it would be ready eventually, that the probability was not 0. He looked at his friend. "I am choosing to believe a 9-year-old girl's probability estimate over my own doubt. It is the most rational thing I have done in my career." He wrote the real account in the winter of 1871. 73 handwritten pages, every detail, every test, every answer she gave. The soldier whose fever broke, the carbolic acid, the Latin, the German, the algebraic proof with the error on line 3, the sound of her brother's voice that she woke up hearing every morning, the drawing of the open window, the 12-page refutation she had written of his own life's work. He put the 73 pages in the metal box with the original 12. He sealed it. He wrote on the outside of the box in large letters, "For Eliza Davis, to be opened when the world is ready." Then he put it back under the floorboards. His housekeeper found the box when he died in 1889.
She did not know what it was.
She put it with the rest of his papers, which went into storage, where they sat for 11 years before a young historian named Miriam Cross pulled them out of a crate in a Philadelphia archive in 1900 and found the sealed metal box at the bottom. She read every page. Then she sat alone in that archive room for a very long time. Then she picked up her pen, and she began to write. Because somewhere, a girl had calculated that the probability was not 0. And she had been right.
She was always right. That was the one thing no one had ever been able to explain, and the one thing that no lie, no false report, no sealed box, and no vanishing act had ever been able to erase. Eliza Davis had existed. She had been real. And she had known before any of them did exactly how this story would end.